So our next speaker is going to be Dr. Tom Warkentin from the CDC. He's a professor and crop breeder at the Crop Development Center at the University of Saskatchewan since 1999. Additionally, Tom holds the Ministry of Agriculture Strategic Research Program Chair in Field Pea Breeding and Genetics. Tom is also involved in breeding soybeans for the short season regions of Western Canada, and he will be providing an update on pea variety development. So I'll hand it over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Lori, for the introduction. Thank you, Kirsten, for a good start to our talks here today. So yeah, thank you, SPG, for opportunity to speak today about some updates on pea breeding. I'm going to provide you at the beginning some summary of varieties that are in the marketplace. Here's a summary of the yellow pea varieties data from Sask Crop Insurance. CDC Meadow still being the most widely grown, but you see there are many other yellow pea varieties that are grown. If you advance, please. Good. So these 4 varieties increased in production in 2020. The others were either steady or declining. If we go ahead one more. So this table, it's a little heavy with data, but hopefully you can see it well enough. And I just want to point out a few things here. Basically, you can find all of this information in the seed guide, but I've sorted it out in a way to rank the varieties from higher to lower in average yield. So you have the name of the variety on the left-hand side, the years of testing, the average yield in the south, the north of the province, and then the average overall. So there's different ways to look at these things. I tend to be a person who likes looking at the mean. I like to have a large number of data to increase my thoughts of reliability. Some people like to say, well, what did it yield in my backyard? And that's interesting too, but it leads to some troubles because we can't have a trial in everyone's backyard. And in any one given trial at any one given place, you know, sometimes strange things can happen. But if you look, for example, at Cdc Amarillo, near the middle of this chart that's colored in yellow, with 12 years of testing and 10, 12 or more locations per year. So those are averages based on about 100 trials. So once you have that kind of a number, you really feel a lot more reliability. Maturity of these varieties are M, medium, or E, early. I would point out that in general, pea is an early maturing crop, so even an M rating is still going to be likely a variety that's harvested before wheat or canola. So pea is early, but some people like extra early. So in that case, you may consider the varieties that are rated as E, or you may promote those varieties. Lodging, 1 to 9, 1 is standing up, 9 is flat. And if you look at the numbers, they're in the range of 3 to 4.5, and you might think, well, there's not much difference there. A couple of things to mention. If we were 10, 15 years ago, the range would be probably from 4 to 7 or so. So I think overall in pea breeding, we've improved on lodging quite a bit. And indeed, there is a difference between a 3 and a 4.5. Again, the lodging scores are the mean of many locations. So basically everywhere where we measure yield, we also measure lodging. So when you take the long-term average, it's worth noting that. So I'll just point out that everything that I mark as a bold face is something that I kind of like, and things in italic are things that are maybe so-so. Seed coat breakage, either fair or good. That is really quite an important trait. If you see under CDC Amarillo, it's rated as fair for breakage. In my opinion, if it had been rated as good, and if it really was good, it would probably be the most widely grown variety now. But because it's only fair, it really got set back. In many other ways, it's a strong variety, but as seed growers, you like to have really good seed coats, and I don't blame you. And so we've really tried to improve on that. The next column is protein versus Amarillo. Amarillo at 23.0 on average. So some are a little higher, some a little lower. I would maybe feature a little bit this year as a variety that you may want to promote. More so is Cdc Spectrum. You see good yield, good lodging score, good for seed coat breakage, and with protein 0.7 higher than Amarillo, 23.7 on average. And it's at the certified seed level this year or it has reached that stage. So might be one to promote. And Lawachko at registered stage might be one to promote a lot for next year. So maybe if we can advance, Lori, to the next slide. Okay, in terms of new releases, so I think in Lori's presentation, she'll tell you about 2 yellow pea varieties that are going to be released right now. The table that you see on your screen is identical to the previous table, except that I've pasted in these 2 new varieties in the orange shading, 4947-2, 4900-13. So for each of those, we have 4 years of testing, and you might be a bit surprised how we get 4 years of testing at the time we release. But that is because 2 years in co-op tests and then 2 years in the Saskatchewan regional test, that makes 4. And during those last 2 years, Dave and Craig have been multiplying the breeder seed. So you see that on average, they're yielding 109 and 107 compared to Amarillo. So they're doing quite well on yield, medium maturity, pretty good for lodging and seed coat breakage. 4900-13 is a little higher than Amarillo in protein, where 4947-2 is 0.2 less. So that might be one way to differentiate the 2. The 4947 is a little higher in yield, but a little lower in protein. So I've indicated those are at the breeder seed level right now. And so, yeah, I think Lori will be mentioning them as well. If we can go to the next slide. Now we talk briefly about green pea. If you click next, here are the varieties and the data from crop insurance. Of course, greens are only grown at maybe 20 or 25% as much area as yellows. Actually, 4 of these varieties increased a little bit in their area production in 2020. I expect CDC Forest is the one that's going to move up the most in the next couple of years. If you click next, I have the yield data, and you see that Forest is quite a strong yielder, yielding actually 101 of CDC Amarillo. So quite a bit more than that of Razor or Striker. It also has quite good seed type. We consider all of these varieties in this table to have good resistance to bleaching, and because that's a really a critical point for greens. And just sort of as a bit of a curiosity, you see the variety Limerick, which is not bad on yield. It's been out there for a few years. It has this trait of having almost 3% higher protein than Amarillo. And so we're trying to make use of that feature in crosses with yellow, so that we can try to bring that higher protein level into a yellow pea background, which will make it more favorable, or make that material more favorable for the fractionation industry. Next slide, please. On green pea, there's one variety, 4506-4, which is basically ready to go. However, the plan is that we would release it a year from now. We do have 4 years of data already, but we don't have a huge amount of breeder seed inventory, so not really enough to make a proper release at this time. But you see, in terms of yield, it's similar to Forest. It's better for lodging. I kind of highlighted that in yellow. Over the last 2 years in the regional trials, this variety was the best or tied for the best in terms of lodging score. So I think, that's a positive feature to consider. But look for that one a year from now. Next slide, please. Okay, maybe before a couple of points, or maybe if you want to just go back one, Lori, sorry about that. I forgot. I thought people might ask, well, okay, how does this one compare to Forest, other than what you see on this table? And there's, a few a few other things to consider. It's a little bit rounder, a little bit less bleaching, even though I call them both good for bleaching, but within that, 4506 is a bit better, but has slightly more dimpling on average on the seed, so that's not as desirable, but also slightly better resistance to Mycosphaerella. So out of those points at the bottom, you know, kind of 3 are positive and 1's a bit negative. So you can consider that in making your decision as well. Go to the next one. If we look ahead a year, in terms of yellow pea, there's 2 varieties I've shaded in orange here that could be considered. And I've indicated them here in comparison to 4947-2 and 4900-13, which are being released right now. You see in terms of yield, they're similar, they're good, but similar. Maturity, lodging, seed coat breakage, many of the traits, they look kind of similar. So you might ask, why would we consider them? And I think the only answer I would have to that is probably if Lori decides to put them into the regional trial again in 21, we'll have 1 more year of data, and perhaps one or the other distinguishes itself from the 2 that we're releasing this year. But if they don't, I think I would tend to vote to not release them. And if you click again, you'll see 2 other potentials for, on the green side, 5151 and 5360. There we have 2 years of co-op and 1 year of regional data for a total of 3. These have a bit of advantage in terms of yield, and they look quite reasonable for the other traits. So again, these varieties will likely go into the regional trial in 21, and we'll update the numbers and make a decision after that. We go to the next slide. So we have the variety registration meetings coming up next month. PGDC, Prairie Grain Development Committee. Every year we meet toward the end of February. I'm thinking to bring 3 varieties forward to that meeting that are the last 3 on this table. You see, first of all, you have the 2 yellow pea checks, Amarillo and Lacombe. You have 2 green pea checks, Limerick and Greenwater. The green candidate is 55-23-7, so yielding 100 compared to Limerick or Greenwater, so there's some advantage there. The seed weight is a little bit bigger than Limerick and Greenwater, and I feel what I'm hearing in the marketplace is that there's an interest in a slightly bigger green, and seed coat breakage percent is 3, which is quite low, so that's a good thing. The 2 yellows, you see some yield advantage. For one of them, you see a lodging advantage. And for both of them, you see protein advantage compared to the checks with low seed coat breakage. So those could be promising. Yield at 104, at first when I look at that compared to Amarillo, it's not so exciting. But one thing that might come out as we test them in regional trialing, where we'll have a bigger set of data from Saskatchewan, we may see them distinguishing themselves a bit there. In the co-op test, remember, about half the trials are in Alberta, and sometimes we see, some varieties do better in Alberta, some do better in Sask. You can go to the next slide, please. So very quickly, aside from our discussion on breeding and varieties, I just want to click through the next 2-3 slides to tell you a little bit about research. So if you can just click ahead a bit, Lori. This paper came out a year or so ago about genome sequencing in pea. Thanks to Sask Pulse Growers for the strong support in that effort. It was an international group, as you can tell. If we click ahead, the next 2 slides also summarize some research papers that were published in the last couple of years from our group. I want to acknowledge Sask Pulse Growers for support of the work that went into that research. Also, the Ministry of Agriculture, Western Grains, and NSERC. Basically, the papers here are dealing with the overall theme of developing markers for different traits such as lodging or maturity or plant height, or things like protein in pea varieties. If we click one more, please. Here's 3 more papers from recent days. I want to acknowledge one person that many of you may not know, Kishore Gali. He's an author on all of these recent papers that I'm showing. He's kind of a quiet guy, but very hardworking and dedicated and smart guy, and has been really a leader in this area. Also, I just want to mention that the first 2 papers here are from grad students from our department who've completed, and Dali completed his PhD a year or so ago, and Delangani finished her master's about a year ago. Okay, if we go ahead. Here's a project. I've probably mentioned it a year ago. I'll just quickly remind you. We affectionately call this project PPOD. Stands for Pea Protein Omics Determination. So basically this is a genomics related project supported by the Ministry of Ag. The main goal is to increase pea protein concentration. Secondly, the quality of the protein. We feel that if we can boost the protein, it will just make the crop more attractive in the in many markets, but especially in the fractionation world. So myself and Bunyamin are leading this effort, and you see there's a long list of co-investigators, some from Saskatchewan, some from elsewhere in Canada, and some from international locations. If we go ahead. And new project, and thanks both to Kirsten and Bunyamin for introducing new projects announced just 2 days ago by the Ministry of Agriculture. This one's related to pea breeding with a focus on root rot resistance. Again, 3/4 funding coming from the ministry, and the other 1/4 divided half-half between SPG and WGRF. Very grateful for this support to everyone. It's really quite critical for us to keep things rolling. As Bunyamin and Kirsten mentioned, we had to reduce our program to some extent in 2020. That was mainly because of COVID. But what we're thinking is that for 21, we'll probably have a similar size program as 20, partly because of COVID, but also because just our overall funding is less, and the number of people we have is less. So I want to throw out there that I'm very open to any future collaborations with SPG, any other projects or partnerships in some way or other. Definitely very keen about that. And if you can advance it, Lori. Thank you. So I'd like to also acknowledge all of our staff, and you see that this is a 2019 picture. We didn't get a photo like this in 2020. Can you imagine putting this many people this close together in the middle of COVID? So even Gloria, who's a very expert photographer, didn't take that on. Also to mention that approx half of these folks aren't working with us anymore due to the fact that our program is smaller. That was kind of a pretty tough thing for all of us in 2020. I'm happy to say that I know of several of them have gotten new jobs in various places. I don't know the story for all of them. And if you can go ahead. Thanks also to these two gentlemen, Dave and Craig, for doing an excellent job each year of making breeder seed of new varieties. And advance again. And acknowledgements to all the funding agencies, to the wonderful people I have the opportunity to work with. It's really a pleasure. And if we click one more, I think it's my last slide, just wishing everybody all the best in the coming season. I heard from Marlena and Chuck that outlooks for pulses look pretty bright, I think, is what I gathered from them. So hopefully we get some nice rainfall in spring, and everyone can have a good crop. So thanks for your attention, and I'm happy. Thanks so much, Lori, for advancing the slides. That's much appreciated. If there's any questions, I'm happy to give it a shot.
Yes, there are a couple of questions that have come through, Tom. The first one is, are you seeing any difference in susceptibility to Aphanomyces between varieties?
Okay, yeah, good question. The short answer is no. I mean, pretty well all the varieties that are out there right now are, broadly speaking, are susceptible to Aphanomyces. There will be subtle differences probably in their resistances to some of the fusariums, but in general, you could say all the varieties are fairly susceptible to the root rots. So therefore, this new project is really having a focus on trying to improve root rot resistance. And we're not starting from scratch. If Sabina was here, she could give you a good summary, but we've been working with Sabina already the last 3, 4, 5 years on putting in place material with better resistance to Aphanomyces. So we're using a molecular breeding approach and trying to bring in resistances that were identified by some of our friends in US and France. And so that material is going to be was in the field last year for the first time on a small scale, and that will be expanding. So we'll be building on that work, and in addition, putting some emphasis on 2 of the important fusarium diseases.
Okay, and one other question for you. Is it true that Lawachko is not as drought tolerant as Spectrum? Any thoughts?
I haven't really heard that comment, and I don't know that is true. I think Lawachko might be a day or 2 later maturing than Spectrum, and so perhaps in dry conditions it runs out of water a little bit sooner. But in general, I don't think that they differ per se in drought tolerance.
Thank you so much, Tom, for your presentation. Your program has consistently brought improved varieties to the province, and 2021 was certainly no exception. Thank you so much for sharing your program with us today.
Thank you.